Welcome to Talking Feds, a roundtable that brings together prominent former federal officials and special guests for a dynamic discussion of the most important political and legal topics of the day. I'm Harry Littman. Trump's first major overseas jaunt since reclaiming the White House took him straight to the Gulf states of Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, where, true to form, diplomacy blurred seamlessly with deal-making. After his sons laid the groundwork on recent advance visits, Trump swooped in to seal a series of private sector windfalls, including real estate and cryptocurrency arrangements. Among the more high-profile developments was Qatar's gift of a $400 million private jet, which Trump announced would replace Air Force One and become a permanent fixture of his post-presidency foundation. That prospect quickly raised concerns on Capitol Hill, particularly around national security, surveillance risks, and the appropriateness of accepting such a gift from a foreign government with complex ties to regional actors, including groups like Hezbollah and Hamas. Notably, even some of Trump's strongest loyalists expressed discomfort. Back home, Trump's plan for one big beautiful bill to cut taxes on the wealthy while slashing support for health, nutrition, education, and clean energy programs hit the skids in the Budget Committee after MAGA budget hawks objected that it didn't cut Medicare and Medicaid enough. That leaves Speaker Mike Johnson with the difficult task of trying to salvage a path forward with little room for error and no Democratic support. Even if the House finds a way through, the bill's fate in the Senate remains highly uncertain. The courts continued to deliver a steady stream of setbacks to the Trump administration, combined in several instances with judges' expression of horror at the patent unconstitutionality of the administration's conduct. Stephen Miller responded with a suggestion that the president might need to suspend habeas corpus, seemingly ignorant that only Congress can take that action and that the predicates for it are not remotely in place. And just hours after we recorded another body blow from the Supreme Court, the court extended its freeze on the Trump administration's attempt to fast-track the deportation of alleged Venezuelan gang members detained in Texas, and with it gave a resounding affirmation that due process still matters. To trace Trump's self-enriching travels abroad and his continued assaults on the rule of law and the middle class at home, we welcome a killer roundtable of great political analysts and Talking Feds MVPs. And they are Peter Baker, the chief White House correspondent for the New York Times and an MSNBC political analyst. Before joining the Times in 2008, Peter reported for the Washington Post for 20 years. He's the author of many books, most recently The Divider, Trump in the White House 2017 to 2021, which he co-wrote with his wife, Susan Glasser, and which we covered in a Talking Books interview. Peter, great to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Tara Setmayer, the co-founder and CEO of the Seneca Project. Formerly, Tara was a CNN political commentator and a Republican communications director on Capitol Hill. She is a resident scholar at the UVA Center for Politics. Always a pleasure to welcome you, Tara.
Always a pleasure to be back.
And Jacob Weisberg, executive chair and co-founder of Pushkin Industries. He previously was CEO of the Slate Group, co-founder of Panoply, and editor-in-chief of Slate Magazine. He's the author of several books, and he is the chair of the Committee to Protect Journalists. Jacob, thanks as always for joining.
Very happy to be here.
So, Trump took his first trip abroad this week. A president's destination for his first trip is typically a closely watched decision. Last time around, Trump went to Saudi Arabia, the first president to take his first trip to the Middle East. This time, he returned to the same region, going to Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. Why do you think he again chose this part of the world for his first trip? What's he trying to say, and what does it in fact show?
Well, I'll say it. He went there, chose there first because of money, 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 and authoritarianism. That is what defines Donald Trump's worldview. He's making business deals for himself under the guise of deals for America. And these are countries where the freedoms that we enjoy as Americans are not the same as over there. And he wishes that he had that level of opulence, that level of money, and that level of control in order to be a monarch or a dictator masked under some form of democracy, which is what that region represents. That's the bottom line. It's transparent as hell this time around. The first time everyone was trying to figure out, why there and what's the appeal. This time, it's quite obvious. His sons have spent time running around that part of the world, making crypto deals, real estate deals, and enriching themselves and the Trump family. Period. That's what it's about for Donald Trump.
Is it just as simple as, the Willie Sutton line, that's where the money is? It sure seems like the obvious explanation.
Yeah, I was on that trip, the original trip 8 years ago when he went there. And remember, the most famous image was him and the king of Saudi Arabia and the president of Egypt with the orb, right? The sort of spooky scene. But I think, look, obviously, yeah, that's right. That is where the money is, right? Jared Kushner got $2 billion investment from the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Management Fund after leaving office, after determining foreign policy towards Saudi Arabia for the United States government. That was actually recommended against by the Saudi sovereign wealth managers themselves and was overruled by the crown prince himself, Mohammed bin Salman, known as MBS. Obviously, Don Jr. and Eric, as we just said, have been all over the Middle East, sealing deals left and right. Then there's the authoritarian aspect of it, no question about it. Normally, presidents like to show their support for friends like Canada, maybe Mexico for their first trip, maybe Britain for their first trip. This is the second time he's made Saudi Arabia his first stop, if you don't count the Pope's funeral, which wasn't planned, obviously. And he is sending a message. He's also trying to, I think, to have a geopolitical impact, which is that Saudi Arabia is now being elevated to a status it didn't have before, not just an energy power, not just an economic power, but as a geopolitical player. That's where some of these talks have been held for Russia and Ukraine peace negotiations.
And he also wants them to join the Abraham Accords.
He wants them to join the Abraham Accords. That would be a huge success for him if he could manage to make that work, no question. That's not going to happen while Gaza is still in flames. And you didn't really hear that much talk about it this trip. But I think that's right. It is a place where he identifies economically, culturally, and geopolitically.
It's also a place where there aren't going to be protests in the street because they're not allowed. Trump on his first trip, he wants it to go well. He doesn't want the images to be crowds waving signs and holding him up in effigy. He's got business over there, as Sarah pointed out, both with his family business, which is entirely corrupt, and kind of the foreign policy business Peter was talking about. One thing that's very interesting is the Iran deal and how that plays in relation to this. And I mean, Trump seems now interested and maybe even ready to make a new deal with Iran, which might be quite similar to the deal with Iran he blew up. And this is one of Trump's signature moves where he attacks a policy as outrageous and a sellout and catastrophic, gets rid of it and replaces it with essentially the same policy with his name on it. It's sort of rebranding the Iranian nuclear deal. And I think that's part of the agenda on this trip, too.
That was how he kind of made his money when he did before he was president. Basically, he was just leasing out his name. We don't really know, but we have reason to think that he's not been that successful a businessman. But if you calculate it up, man, he's been raking in billions in just 100 days in the presidency, all in patent violation. And we'll get to this, of the emoluments clause. And by the way, there are other friends at the trough, right? So a band of CEOs accompanied him more or less on the trip. Some of them, the same leaders who made large donations to his inauguration, which took in a obscene amount of money, $250 million or so. What's your take there?
Well, how long before we see a deal struck between these countries and Elon Musk to use Starlink or whatever other business interests that Elon Musk has over there? He accompanied Trump on this trip. And let's dispense with this myth that Elon Musk has taken a step back or he's somehow not involved anymore. No, he's just a PR nightmare and people don't like him. So he's still around, just not as forward-facing as he was initially because, again, he's a PR nightmare and people don't like him for good reason. But he's still very much involved.
But you see him as just as prominent a role in government.
Absolutely, but more behind the scenes. Money talks. He's the richest man in the world for now. And there's a reason why Donald Trump's motorcade included retrofitted Cybertrucks. They know how to grease the wheels with Trump, no pun intended. And Elon, they know that Elon is part of this debacle. So to see all of that, and also, it's important for people to remember that Saudi Arabia murdered Jamal Khashoggi in a very horrific, planned way. And Donald Trump was effusive in his praise for MBS. MBS jailed and detained his political opponents in order to obtain power. There was questions about how much information and intelligence that Jared Kushner was feeding MBS back in those days when Jared Kushner was reading the presidential daily briefings and Donald Trump was not. And Jared Kushner made several trips over to Saudi Arabia, particularly right before MBS decided to detain his political opponents. There is so much questionable, unethical conflicts of interest here. And the fact that the president of the United States would be so effusive in his praise of someone like MBS just speaks volumes about his character, where his focus is, and what his priority is as president of the United States. What a slap in the face to all of those of us who believe in human rights and common decency in the United States.
Including many of his strongest supporters, right? You had Ben Shapiro saying, taking sacks of goodies from people who support Hamas, the Muslim Brotherhood, Al Jazeera, that's not America first. And no more of a level-headed Trump lover than Laura Loomer said, these are jihadists in suits. Even some of his closest allies have separated on just this point.
It is important to remember that other presidents also take CEOs on foreign trips. That is not unique in that sense. And other presidents, in fact, have sucked up to the Saudis. Look at Joe Biden, who said he was going to make them a pariah for the very reason Tara just talked about, because MBS is a murderer. According to the CIA's own analysis of what happened with Jamal Khashoggi, they said it was absolutely clear that he gave the order in order to not just murder him, but dismember him, literally take him apart.
Disgusting, but Biden was doing it for geopolitical reasons, no?
Well, but that's the point, is that Saudi gets out of the doghouse in the international politics because it pumps a lot of oil. And so Joe Biden, who was trying to figure out how to keep energy markets stable while the Russia war was going on in Ukraine, decided to put aside the moral qualms that he had expressed as a candidate and go to Saudi Arabia and fist bump MBS as a president. I was on that trip too.
Yeah, that wasn't a good look. And don't forget 9/11 and George Bush and the Bush family and the Saudis. Yeah.
Presidents of all parties have had this relationship with the Saudis and put aside other concerns. But what Trump does, of course, as with everything, is more, right? On a scale beyond what others have done in a steroids-like way. Others don't actually go to Saudi Arabia and say, you're a great man. They kind of swallow their concerns, knowing it looks bad and eating it anyway. They don't go there and give the speech that he gave saying, we don't care about human rights. By the way, almost identical to the speech he gave 8 years ago. I heard that same speech 8 years ago. At the same time, by the way, we care about human rights for white Afrikaners coming from South Africa, but women living in Saudi Arabia or foreign domestics who are treated terribly in the UAE or Qatar, we don't care about those. It's very selective, obviously. And again, presidents are selective when they talk about human rights, but few of them are as starkly brazen about it as Trump is.
Yeah, at the same time, I think we have to recognize that while he murdered Jamal Khashoggi in cold blood, MBS is a modernizer. And Saudi Arabia is a country that's really changing. And isolating them, not dealing with them, would not be a good option for a lot of reasons. And part of Trump's instinct is not bad. The instinct that I want to go to the place everything's coated with gold and take some of it back with me is all bad. But the instinct that they can be useful and are necessary in resolving some of these regional conflicts is right. And at some point, I think we do have to say, we're not going to forgive MBS. We're not going to forgive Saudi Arabia. We're not going to accept its human rights violations. But we do have an interest in seeing the country modernize and open up.
But that's what MBS has done smartly, because he knows he's a smart player on the geopolitical stage, that he knew that he had to let women drive or do these things so that countries like the United States and the Western world can make excuses to have to deal with them. Like, it's true, we do need to deal with them. They are players in the region. And so he gives some of these nuggets of seemingly being a moderate while he might be giving women the ability to drive now, sort of, but they're cutting up journalists. So, you know what I mean? It's a tough balance here, but let's not act as though MBS is, like the king of Jordan here.
Sorry, I mean, I'd like to hear you have the debate with someone who knows more about Saudi Arabia than I do, but that question of whether, it's a cover story, essentially whether the modernization is pretext for acceptance and deal making as opposed to a real project. My sense from what I've read about MBS is that his desire to transform the country is real. Doesn't mean it's in any way a moral project or forgivable what he's done, but the opening up is genuine. It's not like, I'll give you this and that in exchange for the other things you'll do for me. It's what he wants to do.
Look, fair enough. And I think you can say the same thing about the UAE, and that's a genuine opening up, and it's got real strategic significance for us. Nevertheless, with Trump, it might be a issue of even a broken clock works right occasionally. It's not clear that he's got that kind of geopolitical vision. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. But the lucre aspect of it's more than a little asterisk here, it seems to me.
Correct. None of those other presidents benefited financially the way that Donald Trump has. And that is the looming issue here that makes the difference. He's not going over there. I mean, yes, it just so happens that dealing with Saudi Arabia is something that we need to do, and that there are ways for him, again, to cover his own personal benefit by saying, well, we do need them, and this is what we need to do. But at the same time, thank you for the $2 billion for my son-in-law and for letting us build Trump-branded properties in Saudi Arabia. It's just crazy.
And we'll just overlook the Constitution for in the meantime. So let's move to the palace in the sky, which was probably the big news story out of the trip. So he revealed plans to accept, is it $400 million? Is it $625 million? It's a nice jet to replace Air Force One, and after he leaves office, to reside in his presidential foundation. 11 bathrooms adorned with gold trim fixtures, heated flooring, bidets, of course, and premium marble. As the lawyer in the crowd, I don't want you guys to have to worry about it. Let me just start by saying the Constitution 100% forbids his taking it unless Congress consents. It is not in any way a gray issue. Doesn't mean, of course, he won't try. And even that, this is sort of different from the attempt to write out the suspension clause of habeas corpus. It's tricky because the Constitution says Congress has to consent. And with a totally supine Congress, if they don't, what happens? But anyway, I did a long Substack on this. In fact, we'll link it to the show. Forget about it, 100% unconstitutional. But let's move to the politics. So this is the move that I think of the whole 120 days or wherever we are, seems to have created more tension and pushback from Republicans in Congress than any other. True red loyalists like Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley that are worried about espionage, citing, as Tara was saying, Qatar's history of supporting Hamas and Hezbollah. And then, of course, there's the whole, as we were just talking about, jihadists in suits. My feel on this is something has turned and the political pressure is getting pretty serious. And if I had to bet, it would be that the Palace in the Sky doesn't become Air Force One.
I was going to say, what's interesting is that the resolution of it has to be political because it can't be legal. Because although this is a clear constitutional violation of the Emoluments Clause, and the Supreme Court has made clear that the only remedy for that is impeachment, we know for certain that a Republican Congress will not move to enforce its prerogative or hold Trump accountable for violating the Constitution.
Although I got to add another legal point, Jacob, because if they don't, it's unconstitutional. They must consent, otherwise he can't take it. That doesn't mean he won't try anyway. They have to vote for it only to let him keep it.
Exactly, but say they don't do that. He accepts the plane. Congress doesn't act. The courts won't enforce that issue between Congress and the executive branch. So, what possible remedy is it? Public opinion is the only restraint at this point. That the level of outrage is large enough and includes enough conservative voices, and be they Laura Looner or whoever else. It's interesting that it's that wing of the kind of conspiratorial crazy end of the party that has a problem with it. But I think you're probably right as a predictive matter. It's too much heat for him to take, including from, a faction on his own side. That's what'll kill it. Nothing else will stop it.
Couple things here. First of all, Harry, I mean, Pam Bondi, our attorney general, said that it's fine.
That's right.
So your legal analysis and the Constitution be damned. Pam Bondi, our illustrious attorney general, said it's fine.
Our illustrious Trump attorney, she's made that clear.
That's true. Yeah. But also, what else do we know about Pam Bondi? She was a lobbyist for the Qataris, making $115,000 a month for her firm for the Qataris, among many others in the administration, like Susie Wiles, Kash Patel, who was a consultant for Qatar. And we have no idea exactly what he did for them or how much they paid him because he never disclosed it on his financial disclosures. And yet these people were confirmed. Steve Witkoff, who is in The Envoy. Mother Jones did a whole story about this. Steve Witkoff did a deal, $623 million. The Qataris bailed him out in a real estate deal, the Park Lane Hotel. And who else? Oh, the ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, was paid $50,000 to give a speech in Qatar. So all of this is the Qataris buying influence. We need to really stop categorizing this as a gift because it's not. It's a bribe.
Why is Qatar doing this? What's in it for Qatar?
Because they've spent $100 billion ingratiating themselves to the federal government and people inside government in the United States. And look at how it's paid off.
So just rounding it up here.
Absolutely. We all know not only is this just, again, a bribe, but it's also an affront to America First, which is why some of the folks on the MAGA side are upset about this. Boeing has always made the Air Force One airplanes. Boeing has its own problems. We know this, but it's a great American company. And we don't have to worry about Boeing being a potential national security risk when they make Air Force One. We have to consider that when the Qataris, any foreign government, I don't care who it was, you don't accept a plane that's supposed to be Air Force One from another country. They'd have to strip it down to its studs to make sure there isn't any kind of surveillance in there. So I'm sure the national security apparatus, the Secret Service, everyone else is going, this is going to cost us, nothing's for free, by the way. It's going to cost us billions of dollars to retrofit this thing. You're not going to be able to do it in time for his presidency, because assuming he leaves in 2028, it's a disaster. It all was supposed to be a way to ingratiate themselves to Trump because his own plane, because he's a cheap SOB. His own plane, Trump Force One, is falling apart. He wants a new plane. This one's got gold in it like he likes because he's tacky and gaudy. And that's what it's about. It's about that. And it's so obvious to everyone that's looking at this that this is why it's broken through, because you've got this opulence. Donald Trump wants this plane. How can you be America first, but you're taking a plane that's like one of the most American symbols ever, an Air Force One, from a foreign government? The American people are suffering with tariffs. We're losing small businesses and all of this, and you want this big plane? It's wrong in so many ways.
Yeah, I would add, I think Tara's right to point out the security element of it, by the way. There's no way you could retrofit this plane, which, by the way, is 13 years old, too. It's not a new plane. It's a hand-me-down.
They've been apparently trying to unload it for a while.
You could not retrofit that plane in any kind of near-term basis for any kind of decent amount of, small amount of money to fit what you have as requirements for the President of the United States in order to be able to run a nuclear war from the air. That's the requirement for Air Force One. You have to be able to communicate. You have to be able to defend the plane. You have to be able to manage the world's most important superpower from 30,000 feet. Remember what happened on 9/11 when Air Force One took off with George W. Bush in Florida, and they flew him to different air bases because they were worried about being targeted. And he couldn't talk to the ground. He was having trouble communicating with the ground during this incredible crisis. It led Joe Hagan, the deputy White House chief of staff at the time, to completely retrofit the plane to try to upgrade its communications to modern levels. That took years. It would be an extraordinary project to turn this luxury jet meant for, Playboy, sheiks into a serviceable security headquarters for a commander-in-chief in a time of war with that could resist an EMT pulse, that could defend itself against missiles coming out from hostile planes. I mean, this is not an easy thing. There's a reason why Boeing hasn't managed to produce the new Air Force One in so many years, because it's not a simple plane. It's not about the gold fixtures. It's about the requirements of being commander-in-chief. Last point about this, to the point of why we don't take planes for our president from foreign governments. Let's remember what we did to the Chinese. People forget this. In 2002, the Chinese bought a plane from an American producer, Boeing, for its president, Jiang Zemin. Guess what? They found 27 bugs on board. Not surprising. That's what governments do. If we're going to bug planes that we give to other heads of state, imagine what they're going to do with ours.
Peter, if I can just make one other point about the Qataris. Trump is very conveniently forgetting who is the big funder of pro-Hamas voices at American universities. It's not these student organizations whose leaders he's trying to deport to foreign countries. It's the Qataris who spent scores of millions of dollars underwriting professorships, curricular development in secondary school, all with the goal of advancing the point of view of Hamas, simply put, which has been their ally. I mean, you start looking for hypocrisy in Trump world, you just talk yourself blue in the face and bang your head against the wall. But the irony is a little stupefying that Trump is doing both of these things at the same time.
Right. I'm old enough to remember, Jacob, that when a president of the United States just 8 years ago said that Qatar was a funder of terrorism at high levels, of course. But to Tara's point, that why is it that Trump no longer thinks that they're a funder of terrorism at high levels? Well, certainly the Qataris have taken a lot of efforts and spent a lot of money in the last 8 years to make sure that people in Washington think more kindly toward them, right? Why are they hiring Pam Bondi? Is Pam Bondi really an expert on whatever legal needs and lobbying needs that Qatar might have in Washington? Of course not.
I hadn't realized what the point that Tara and Peter made, that this couldn't happen anyway as a practical matter.
Which makes you think that it's about not while he's in office, but having a cool plane after he leaves office, which gets to your emoluments issue.
100%.
Yeah, which puts a capital E in the emolument clause violation.
Just one other quick thing about the hypocrisy of this that I think that MAGA is waking up to. Remember when Republicans were raising Cain about the Chinese putting money into the Confucius centers and institutes in academia all across the country? And that was a big issue. But they've said mum about the Qataris and how they have funded pro-Hamas voices, yet they want to go after Columbia and Harvard and other universities because they claim that they allowed them to have their free, First Amendment rights to assemble and protest. We don't have to agree with any of it, but it's allowed in this country. And yet they are snatching people off the streets that are professors or students and taking their visas, detaining them because they wrote articles or had a point of view that was more pro-Hamas. So, I mean, this level of hypocrisy, and more people should be talking about that because make it make sense, because the math isn't mathing.
No, it's really good. It's an exquisite hypocrisy. It's not just simply in principle. There's a tension. I mean, they literally are taking from one side and giving to the other, and it's a pretty ugly side. Okay, just one quick question I didn't want to leave before we move on from his trip. Where's Israel in all of this? He skips Israel. They say it's not a snub. What's his decision say about his, priorities in the region?
Yeah, I mean, look, of course it's a snub. There's a very conscious decision not to go there. You don't go that close to Israel and then not visit in a time when Israel is facing its own, security crisis and in the middle of a very ugly war. And he did go to Israel on that trip 8 years ago when he went to Saudi. He made a point of going from Saudi to Israel. That was the point. And if your issue is, or your interest is, expanding the Abraham Accords to include more Arab countries like Saudi Arabia in their diplomatic relations with Israel, then you might want to go to Israel. But in fact, he's not on the same page right now with Bibi Netanyahu. And it's really interesting because, of course, they were so close for so long in the first term. But it really began to fray, actually, in his last year of the first term in 2020. He got mad at Bibi Netanyahu for coming to the White House, and as he saw it, using the announcement of their peace plan as a campaign speech platform. He got mad that Netanyahu seemed to be moving forward on settlements, annexation of the West Bank in a way that Trump hadn't approved. And they really got mad at Netanyahu for congratulating Joe Biden on winning the election in 2020. So right now they're on different sides of these issues. The Iran talks that Jacob mentioned, that's not where Bibi Netanyahu's head is at. Recognizing the Syrian president who used to be a member of al-Qaeda and lifting sanctions, that's not where the Israelis are right now. On stopping the attacks on the Houthis because they promised not to go after our ships, but it's still okay for them to go after other ships that are going to Israel. That's not where Netanyahu is. So it's a very tense moment in this relationship.
What Trump would want from Israel is a quick win on the war that he could take credit for brokering, a ceasefire. He clearly can't get that. And that's the only reason he would go there at this point. He doesn't want to deal with Netanyahu for the reasons you said, Peter. He doesn't like him. He's not pliable in the way Trump would like. They don't coat everything in gold there. It's not his, it's just not his happy place. He'll go there when he can achieve something that he thinks will get him the Nobel Prize.
Yeah, when he can break ground on the Trump resort in Gaza, right? I mean, that's it. Let's be honest. You're right about that, Jacob. He can't get what he wants out of Netanyahu, which is a quick win either on the geopolitical stage on something that's really complicated or some financial benefit. Maybe if Don Jr. and Eric go over there and Netanyahu has a crypto conference or something, then maybe, Donald Trump will find a reason to go to Israel. It's ridiculous.
Or if they create the freedom zone in Gaza that he still seems to be talking about with the inconvenience of the Gazans who all live there. But we're going to have to leave that to the side.
I'll be very curious to see what Netanyahu's speech at UNGA is this year when he comes to the U.S. in New York in September.
Yeah. As Jacob says, he's not pliable to anybody, right?
Well, he's also trying to save his own ass over there, too. He's got problems domestically as well. So Netanyahu's got a lot going on.
All right, it is now time for a spirited debate brought to you by our sponsor, Total Wine and More. Each episode, you'll be hearing an expert talk about the pros and cons of a particular issue in the world of wine, spirit, and beverages.
Thank you, Harry. In today's spirited debate, we dig up the dirt on the agave plant to find out the difference between tequila and mezcal. So first things first. Tequila is a type of mezcal, much like bourbon is a type of whiskey. In general, tequilas are mezcals, but not all mezcals are tequilas. Allow me to explain. Tequila can only come from the blue agave plant in specific regions of Mexico, like the region of Jalisco, where the city of Tequila is located. No coincidence there. Mezcal, however, can be made from many varieties of agave, specifically from the heart of the agave, known as the piña. The distillery process for tequila and mezcal is also different. Tequila is produced by steaming the blue agave and then distilling it in copper stills for a toasty, clean taste. On the other hand, mezcal, which appropriately means oven-cooked agave, is cooked in earthen pits with wood and charcoal before being distilled in clay pots. No wonder mezcal, which is typically consumed straight, has more of a smoky, earthy taste. Of course, the best way to get to know the differences between tequila and mezcal is to pick up a bottle of each from your Total Wine & More and pour hundreds of years of tradition right into your glass. Cheers!
Thanks to our friends at Total Wine & More for today's A Spirited Debate. Let's return stateside to the big, beautiful bill that seems to be wending its way through the House. It passes several big committees on Wednesday, but just now, the Budget Committee tanks it. Is it DOA? Where are we now with the big, beautiful bill?
Well, you're going to have Mike Johnson scrambling to try to figure out a way to resurrect it. This is not going to make Donald Trump happy. By the time people are listening to this, I'm sure he will have some things to say about this blowing up now. But you had many factions within the Republican Party. Obviously, Democrats are all in line about this being a disaster for all the reasons, the cuts to Medicaid and everything else. But the more important political parts of this where Republicans were not united. You had the moderates who were upset about what was happening with the SALT tax stuff because they got screwed over, in states like New Jersey, New York, and blue states where you had Republicans who said, this is not okay. The taxes are too high here for us, but they didn't matter the first time around. This time, they're more vocal about it. You heard that from folks like Mike Lawler in New York. Also, what's happening with Medicaid in red states. This impacts MAGA voters. And you have a lot of Republicans here who understand that cutting Medicaid is grossly unpopular. All the polling this week showed that. It's overwhelming. CNN had a poll that showed 76% of the American people were against cutting Medicaid. George Washington has 78% approval. Like, this is something, you don't get to this level of agreement in American politics anymore, but people agree. And even 55% of Republicans, if you break it down by party, were against cutting Medicaid. Right, because a lot of red states rely on Medicaid. So then you have the other side of the Republican Party, the MAGA conservatives, who felt as though there weren't enough cuts. So they were far apart on a lot of these things. And Mike Johnson, when it comes down to the budget, listen, I was a Hill staffer for 7 years. I've gone through this appropriations process many times, and the back and forth and the politics of this are always complicated. But this is really where you have those fiscal hawks, also a problem for Mike Johnson, and they have not been able to get it together. So it's not going to be dead. You'll find something, but it's dead for right now.
Yeah. If you look at the budget committee, it went down because of the hard right. And Tara's right. I mean, there are issues on both sides of the Republican spectrum. This particular moment was 5 Republicans on the budget committee said, no, we won't go along with it because it doesn't go enough. It doesn't go far enough in cutting Medicaid. They want specifically to speed up the work requirements for Medicaid benefits, to immediately get rid of any Medicaid for undocumented immigrants, things like that.
All part of Project 2025, by the way. If you look at what they're looking at, this was all written in Project 2025 as budget priorities, and they're ticking them off.
And it's worth remembering that it was President Trump who said, no, I'm not touching Medicaid, right? Obviously, as we've discussed before, consistency is not necessarily his most defining feature, but this puts it right squarely into one of his promises, which is that Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid off the table. Now, obviously, at least one of those 3 is on the table in a big way. And how do you reconcile the moderates, as Tara said, who don't want to cut benefits for their constituents in places where red state districts really do depend on these programs, and the conservatives, ultra conservatives, who think that they have squandered every opportunity to get the fiscal house in order and think this is the moment they should do it. Now, Trump has a way of lining them up. Once he actually applies himself, he does have a strong record of forcing Republicans to eat things they don't necessarily want to eat. But then, of course, you get to the Senate. I mean, whatever they pass here anyway is still a dead letter in the Senate. And we're still at a very, fraught stage of the process.
And just in brief, why? I mean, dead letter? I know there's obvious resistance. What makes it a dead letter in the Senate, would you say?
Oh, I just think that the senators are not going to go along with what the House Freedom Caucus wants. I mean, it's just not their history.
If you're a senator in a red state, a state that relies so heavily on Medicaid, we're just using that as an example because it's such a large piece of this. There's no way when you have to be elected statewide. Look at the senators that are up for re-election in 2026. There's no way they're going along with this, because if I'm on the other side, I will drag you about this, that you chose Donald Trump over your own constituents and their needs. I mean, the ads write themselves if the senators go along with this.
Trump's approach to Congress is treat them as a gratuitous appendage of the government until you need to steamroller them. And that has worked pretty well to date because they've been so quiescent and willing to knuckle under. The part of the problem is when you have such a slim majority, you're giving so much potential power, any Republican in the House or Senate, that they can't resist using it, and presented with, a kind of garbage can of a bill. And then there starts to be, at the same time that you're empowering the individuals to block you or extract tremendous concessions, there starts to be a safety in numbers phenomenon for them, where enough of them dislike enough things, even if they aren't the same things, that collectively, they're not standing up to him in a way that's going to hurt them back home, but they are able to say, you know what, we're not going to pass this bill. And that's where he is right now. I don't think he can steamroller a version of this through. I think it's going to take actual negotiations. And boy, it's hard to see if you have to pass both houses with no Democratic support. I mean, what's the minimum bill, the minimum viable bill that all the Republicans, House and Senate Republicans, agree on? It's tax cuts that are paid for without touching the programs where the money is. So I think at some fundamental level, it's undoable.
Yeah, that's what it seemed to me. I mean, they were sort of relying in some way on some kind of leisure demand by Johnson when push comes to shove. But I don't have a sense of a strategy of an end game, just kind of push it a little down the road. Then Johnson pulls a rabbit out of his hat, then they take to the Senate, et cetera.
But that's the challenge when you put these things in big bills. That's why they don't usually do this. You're supposed to pass the budget with, appropriations with each cabinet. If you break it up into 12 or 13 bills, and they have not been able to do this for years and years and years and years. But that was the original way you're supposed to do appropriations. You don't do these big, quote, beautiful bills, because there are different interests for different areas of the government where you have more expertise by some members of Congress than others. That's why you have committees. That's why these are supposed to go through respective committees like the Ag Bill and, Department of Justice and Homeland Security and the Pentagon Bill. You don't put it all in one thing. And so this is what happens. So what you're going to see is they tried this. And then the people who know better, the experienced appropriators who have been around a long time, who understand how this process works, are the adults in the room are finally going to get together and say, we have to break this up. And then you're going to get bits and pieces of things broken up, because there are aspects of the government that have to be funded and they have to get passed. And unless you get into a government shutdown situation again, nobody wants that. And so, mark my words, you're going to see them start to break this up in order to get some parts that everyone can agree on passed.
And you really know from your background. Let me just ask, is there an opportunity here for the Dems, or in general, what do they do to avoid being steamrolled and completely out of the process?
They filibuster, because the Democrats actually have the upper hand here in protecting and defending the programs that are popular with the American people. So as long as the Democrats don't get in their own way, because this is internecine warfare that's going on with the Democrats right now is not helpful for them politically. They need to get it together because they look feckless and weak when they do this. This gives them an opportunity to rally around something that looks as though they are fighting for the American people, which for the Democrats, they happen to be right. And they have more support from the American people across the board on a lot of these issues that they're trying to fight and defend.
And in the House?
Well, the House is actually, because of how close it is, because in the Senate, right, it only takes one to filibuster. We saw what Cory Booker did a couple weeks ago, which was a huge boost for the Democrats, and it brought attention to what the Republicans are trying to do. It was a successful political thing. You can do that again in the Senate and hand it off to other ones and pick the issues and make the American people aware of it. So that's what they can do in the Senate. In the House...
Wait, Tara, I'm sorry to interrupt. Correct me if I'm wrong, but as long as they do this under reconciliation, they can't filibuster it.
That's true.
And that's part of what hems them in, is the requirements of doing it under reconciliation, which is that everything has to have a budget impact. You can't put other stuff in the bill that doesn't.
If there's an appetite for that, I don't know. If there's an appetite for that, to do it under reconciliation again.
That's how you do it now. That's the only way you can get a party line bill through for exactly that reason. But I think what you said is exactly right. That it politically makes a lot of sense for the Democrats to try to figure out how they can get credit for defeating it. It's not the reality. The reality is they're on the sidelines being ignored. But if it's going to get defeated, it would be healthy for them to be able to say, you know what, raising these issues about the cruel cuts to the poor and the unfunded increase in the deficit stopped the bill. And to some extent, that's true, because that is part of the public outcry against it.
Combined with the huge tax cuts for the wealthy, it really is an ugly bill from the middle class point of view.
And it's not a Democrat or Republican issue here. These cuts and the programs and what they're trying to do impacts everyone, which is what Democrats need to really message it that way, that, he's even doing this to you, MAGA. Like, no one is safe from this. The cognitive dissonance here is pretty obvious, and it's self-defeating. So are you guys okay with taking one for the team? For what? You're going to suffer also. It's the same argument with the tariffs and what's happening with the economy. So they need to make it about the MAGA Republicans who are also going to suffer. Are you okay with suffering for this?
Now, there are some conservatives who are making the argument that, look, the midterms are lost anyway. They're going to lose the House because history suggests that they will lose the House. They have such a narrow majority to begin with. And
3 seats.
Right. So typically a president's party loses more than 3 seats in the first midterm. And so if you're a conservative who genuinely cares about, some of these issues, your argument to the caucus is, let's just get done what we can get done while we have the power, because we're not going to win the election anyway. I don't know that's going to gain a lot of traction. But the question then becomes, is that theory of the case make you more or less willing to defy Donald Trump if, in fact, at some point he says, look, we have to get a friggin' deal here, and I don't actually really care what's in it, but you have to vote for whatever Mike Johnson tells you to vote for, because I'm not going to be presiding over this mess for a lot longer.
Well, tell that to Don Bacon.
This is the Elon Musk viewpoint, right? It's never going to be better.
Right.
Let's just ram it all through.
But you have to make that argument to Republicans who are in swing districts like Don Bacon and others, right? They're not going to want that. And all it takes is 3 to defect. And you're asking some of these members to sacrifice themselves for Donald Trump's political win. I don't think so. Good luck with that.
We've elected you to walk the plank. Yeah,
Right.
that's exactly where the rubber meets the road.
All right. Quick shameless plug, because Tara mentioned Cory Booker. We do this Talking San Diego live conversations here, and Senator Booker is going to be here next week, May 29th. Okay, let's just take a few minutes to talk about a lot of stuff is happening legally in my bailiwick, and they're really getting their heads handed to them again and again. But the really eyebrow-raising comment came from the apparent legal spokesperson for the administration, Stephen Miller, who proposed that maybe we'll just have to suspend habeas corpus if the courts don't rule in our favor. Lawyers point, I'll do it again, 100%. And not only, first, it's 100% unconstitutional. Only Congress can suspend. It must be, the public safety must require it. And what that means is not there's problems with public safety. It means that the public safety must require that courts not sit and provide due process. It's A, 100% unconstitutional, and B, unlike the Emoluments Clause, it won't happen because the courts will just continue to recognize. So this is going nowhere. But now just to move to the politics. So in my little nerdy world, it's like so mind-blowing that they would propose to do this. And I would put it first in the Bill of Particulars against Trump if they tried to do it before tax cuts to the wealthy, et cetera. And I just wanted to get your sense of, is this, really have hit home for the American people? I was on MSNBC this couple days ago, and the question I fielded is, what's habeas corpus? So I was left a little bit depressed at the possibility that this has the kind of weight and moment and alarm politically, broadly politically within the that it feels to me. So thoughts about the level of consternation, including zero, that it might provoke in the American people, this whole issue.
Well, Harry, you could call it a no trial balloon from Stephen Miller. But, I would actually put it in the category with Trump 2028 and buying Greenland and the Trump Gaza. There's a kind of trolling here, putting out things that are so outrageous that they don't expect to happen, but in some way, in some extreme negotiating theory, then define, anchor the discussion so far in crazy land that if it resumes somewhere, it's already tilted to that side. But the thing that, was more momentous in this same category was the Supreme Court hearing on birthright citizenship and the issue of the universal injunction, which was super interesting. And I'd love your take on it, but my sense was that the justices were making pretty clear that there is a limit to what they're going to let Trump do on his own. And then in particular, for want of anything else, the idea that any federal judge can stop him from doing something illegal is necessary because Trump and the Trump administration are just consistently violating the law and the Constitution. Only the courts can stop him, and their attempt to attack the current mechanism by which the federal courts are stopping him is untenable.
This is one that the media really whiffed on. I think it's very nuanced and complicated. Steve Vladeck and I had I thought, a really good half-hour discussion about it the very day that I would commend people to. But it is rich and tricky, and I think the court is wrestling with it.
A couple things. First off, I would caution everyone to not dismiss this outright as not something that could happen in this country. We are watching every single day issues that this administration is putting forward that we never thought would happen in this country. Arresting judges, threatening members of Congress, arresting mayors of cities, threatening the Supreme Court, threatening Bruce Springsteen and warning him that he may not be able to come back into the U.S. because he spoke out about Donald Trump. There are a litany of things that are happening, that have happened in the first 120 days that no one thought could happen here. And that was actually part of what Bruce Springsteen said, just to bring that up. For those who don't know, Bruce Springsteen is starting another concert tour. He was in Manchester, England, and he gave this beautiful, very impassioned speech about what's happening in America. And he said it's happening now. And he's warning the American people that these things are happening now. And Donald Trump threatened him on Truth Social. And people never thought that American citizens or legal residents would be snatched off the streets of America because of dissenting viewpoints that they've had and shipped off to gulags in another country. So I would be very careful in thinking that no way this could happen here. It's happening now in the terms of the great Bruce Springsteen. Listen, the habeas corpus issue is so important. We all understand that, but we also know what habeas corpus is. Unfortunately, the overwhelming majority of the American people can't name who the vice president is and what 3 branches of government we have. They damn sure don't know what habeas corpus is. Therefore, they can't understand why it's so important that we protect it. We need to use our platforms to explain it very easily and explain to the American people why this is something that Stephen Miller, even floating the idea, is so against the day-to-day freedoms of us, and it applies to everybody and everyone should care. That's the first thing. We've got to define it.
Magna Carta, baby.
Yeah, well, speaking of the Magna Carta, did you see that Harvard University has an original Magna Carta and they didn't know it? They bought it in an auction for $27 in 1946, and they found out, like scholars found out, that it's actually an original version of the Magna Carta. I just read this a couple days ago. Is that amazing?
Wow.
That ought to be worth enough to go past all the billions.
I know. I was like, oh my God. I was explaining to my husband. I was like, this is a big deal. He's like, what? I was like, oh my God. But most people don't know what the Magna Carta is either.
We should all be looking in our attics. Who knows what's up there?
Right. But anyway, I just think that it's important that, like what Stephen Miller is saying, we need to believe these people. We need to believe them. When they say these things, Steve Bannon saying about 2028 and all of that, they are working on this. So do not let lack of imagination catch us flat-footed. They are itching to deploy the Insurrection Act. They're itching to deploy martial law. And let's not forget, the last time habeas corpus was issued in this country was Civil War, during Reconstruction, when the Ku Klux Klan was overrunning southern counties, and World War II. That's it. We are nowhere close to any of those things, and don't let them BS us into believing that we're somehow invaded or that we're at war. Listen to what they say and what they try to do.
Yeah, I think Tara makes a good point. I think that, and Jacob, I take your point. I think you're right that some of these things are trolling, and he loves to own the libs. He loves to get people upset. Stephen Miller loves to throw things out there that get everybody worked up and talking about things that they'll probably never, ever do. But you can't make the judgment anymore about which ones are that and which ones are things they actually will do, right? I think in the first term when he talked about birthright citizenship, right? We all said, oh, come on, he's never going to try to overturn the 14th Amendment or a traditional interpretation of it. Here we are at the Supreme Court because he's tried to do exactly that. Now, again, he doesn't really have a constitutional option to run for a third term. He doesn't, in theory, have a constitutional option to suspend habeas corpus. But I think nothing is completely off the table. I think that these things ought to be taken seriously on some level, even as we recognize the obvious reasons why they might not ever happen. To the extent that the public cares, I think they'll care if it's American citizens. I don't think they're going to care too much. They won't get a big popular backlash anyway if they use them on immigrants, as whether that's offensive legally and constitutionally or not. The thing that will get a public response will be if he actually does, which he has talked about, trying to deport American citizens to El Salvador prisons or what have you. And there have been instances where American citizens have been stopped trying to come into the country. They weren't believed when they were told that they were citizens or made to prove it in ways that they hadn't had to do it in the past. So, they're on the edge of that. And the question is, do they go to that next step? And nothing should be assumed.
What's to stop them, Peter?
But he doesn't throw that. Stephen Miller doesn't throw that out there lightly. I think he at least is probably quite serious about that. And we'll see how far they follow through.
All right. And always the question, as Tara put it, what's to stop them? Great points and great conversation, as it always is when any of the three of you are here. So this is like times 8. Really, thank you so much. We have just half a minute left for the final 5 words or fewer feature. And today the question is the sort of quick name for this Qatar plane is the Palace in the Sky. I'm not sure how well that flies. Is there what would be an alternative name, 5 words or fewer, for the proposed new Air Force One?
Because it seems like it's not happening, I would say, who killed the golden goose?
Very good. 5 exactly. Okay.
I'm not really good at this. I was thinking flying hand-me-down one.
Nice.
Okay, let's see. Flight of the Orange Authoritarian.
Wow. And everyone's exactly 5 words, so I'm going to be 5 words exactly as well. Please speak into the ashtrays. Thank you so much, Peter, Tara, and Jacob. And thank you very much, listeners, for tuning in to Talking Feds. If you like what you've heard, please tell a friend to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts or wherever they get their podcasts. And please take a moment to rate and review this show. You can also subscribe to us on YouTube, where we are posting full episodes, talking books, and bonus video content. Check us out on Substack now, at Talking Feds Substack, where I am posting 2 or 3 bulletins a week, going live and sharing other exclusive content that breaks down the various threats to constitutional norms and the rule of law. You can follow us on Twitter at Talking Feds Pod. Talking Feds remains a completely independent production, so it's your support and nothing else that funds all of our franchises. We just couldn't do it without you. And as you may know, Talking Feds has now joined forces with The Contrarian. I'm a founding contributor to this new media venture, which is committed to reviving the diversity of opinion that feels increasingly rare in today's news landscape, where legacy media seems to be tacking toward Trump for business reasons rather than editorial ones. Rest assured, we are still the same scrappy independent podcast you've come to know and trust, but now linked up with an ambitious and vital project designed for this pivotal moment in our nation's legal and political discourses. Find out more at contrarian.substack.com. Thanks for tuning in, and don't worry, as long as you need answers, the feds will keep talking. Talking Feds is produced by Catherine Devine. Our associate producer is Becca Havian. Sound engineering by Matt McCardle. Rosie Dawn Griffin, David Lieberman, Hamza Mahadrenathan, Emma Maynard, and Hallie Necker are our contributing writers, and production assistance by Akshaj Turbailu and Sebastian Navarro. Our music, as ever, is by the amazing Philip Glass. Talking Feds is a production of Delito LLC. I'm Harry Littman. Talk to you later.